Everybody, how we doing? It is Friday, May 19th, a little past 11 a.m. here on the East Coast. This is what I am watching and reading today. Financial Times got a great headline, quote, "The appetite for global risk management is growing." I completely concur. What's interesting about this article, though, they're talking about the amount of former military and government officials involved in giving advice, consultancy, advisory roles for corporations, which I think is great. They certainly have a role, diplomacy, military folks, policy pros. But I would tell everybody out there, as a communication pro myself, get some people that understand culture, psychology, behavioral economics, communications in general at the table as well, giving you advice. A lot of this stuff needs to be looked through much more from a kaleidoscope perspective, not a telescope. So make sure you've got a rich, bountiful perspective on what's happening in the world. G7 is about to start. I think it probably is starting over there in Japan, Hiroshima. Listen, what's going to come out of this is a lot of talk about China. Got a very interesting situation. The G7 made up of the world's most prosperous economies, most prosperous democracies, which all have a vested interest in some kind of role with China, whether trade, investment, partnership, not wanting to antagonize them, etc. So it's going to be really interesting what comes out of this meeting. A little phrase I've been using is us, U.S., United States versus them. A lot of pressure from Team Biden to tell the rest of the world that we really need to come together, whether it's friend shoring, ally shoring, economic partnership, even this idea of a NATO, economic NATO. So it's going to be really interesting. It's one of the most important meetings we've had in a while. And it's going to be interesting to see what kind of communique they come out with. Politico's got a story about Ukraine being, quote, called a frozen conflict, much akin to the situation we still have in the Korean Peninsula. As you know, the Korean War has never officially ended. They're in a total stalemate. Or you really could have the same situation in Ukraine, really no sign of either side winning. And even if, quote unquote, Ukraine wins, there's no guarantee that Russia will not come back in 2 or 3 years later time and try to do the same thing again. So really interesting dynamic. I think this is obviously going to be on the agenda at the G7. But when you talk about China, you're really talking about Ukraine, commodities, chips, all this kind of stuff. So no other really global activity can be discussed without China there in mind. But Ukraine, frozen conflict. So not a great term. DeSantis looks like it's going to happen. A lot of news reports. Looks like he's a go next week. There's a story in the New York Times with a quote, "It's Biden and me." DeSantis privately tells donors Trump can't win. So going to be a lot of stories this weekend about Ron DeSantis. Currently, I think he's had a pretty tough rollout. He gives me the impression of a congressman that really hasn't made the leap to the presidential level, but we'll see. There's nothing like a presidential campaign. It's the most raw form of campaigning we have. It's very high-low. It's everything from having ice cream in Dixville Notch, New Hampshire, to doing big media events in San Diego. So we'll see. Will Ron DeSantis be the next president? He's certainly going to launch and try next week. Finally, Man Utd is getting a new owner. Simon Kuper's got a great story in the Financial Times. Simon Kuper is one of the foremost columnist writers thinking about professional sports today. He's written a great book about Barcelona, really talking about the psychology, the ego of owning a sports franchise. As we alluded to earlier in the week, the Washington Commanders went for $5 billion. Looks like Man Utd is going to go for $5 billion. So if you want to get into pro sports at a high level, save your money. That's it, everybody. We'll be back on Monday. Have a great weekend. Thanks for watching.